This notion somehow Chinese economy and Chinese currency will be good for the world is an illusion that I can understand why Chinese want to propagate it. But I think the other innocents around the world are simply swallowing this. But I don't think even India, they might not say this, Indian government might not say this. Is India desperate to replace dollar with yuan?
So in this week's Rajamandala in the column, you've looked at the BRICS Summit, which is upcoming now. Prime Minister Modi is, of course, gone to South Africa to attend the summit. One of the things that stood out, as you pointed out, the headlines in our newspaper, of course, and newspapers across the board, is that the focus is actually on the meeting with China, with President Xi perhaps on the sidelines. Do you think that the BRICS as a whole, because we also look at in the piece how Pretoria is also sort of inching closer to China in its own ways, and there's a priority there. We know about Russia, China. Do you think China and its agenda sort of threatens to become the central pole of BRICS if it hasn't already?
No, yeah, I think that's what China is trying to do. I mean, but this agenda is not something that automatically suits India or Brazil. So I think this way the interesting dynamic will be that India, I mean, this notion that, that China will set the terms for the world order, given what our own experience with China is in the last few years, is quite clearly unacceptable. Though Lula is on the left, strongly critical of the US, that does not mean he's simply going to back Chinese agenda. I think the problem is South Africa has been weak, and I think Chinese have moved in a big way. So we can see why South Africans are doing what they're doing, more closer to China. But my sense is that there will be a lot of play. So I think there is so much of rhetoric, which actually, even before they have signed a document, the way the rhetoric going around de-dollarization, new world order, global South, I think problem is people love to see this, a revolutionary transformation in the world order, but those things don't happen too often.
Yeah. So, you touched on this global South, which is a big part of the piece, and I think everyone should read the piece. It's on the IndianExpress.com, and it should be in the description or wherever you're watching this video. So that there was the Bandung Conference in 1954, and of course the non-aligned movement, which was at the height of the Cold War and through the Cold War. Seems to be an attempt to paint this, because BRICS emerged as a sort of Russia, as you point out, ran with it. But it was more an economic grouping to begin with and more about multipolarity in a post-Soviet world. Now there seems to be an attempt to make China and perhaps to an extent Russia the champions of the global South. How do you see that contradiction?
This is what people are doing here is entirely unreasonable, to conflate BRICS with either Bandung or with the global South. Both are completely wrong, this framing these two things together. Because if you think of the political side, non-alignment, what began as a Bandung movement, Afro-Asian, then became the non-aligned movement, was to keep distance from both the powers. But here we are actually, the two of the rival parties are sitting in this grouping. They want to turn this into an anti-Western forum. So this is not, the agenda of China and Russia is not similar to Bandung. Bandung wanted the post-colonial states to have a say for themselves in a world that was being squeezed by Russia, Soviet Union on the one side and Russia and United States on the other. So this is actually Russia and China are trying to fight their battles with the West. And I think they want to dragoon the rest of the world, especially the developing world, into their battles. I think that's where the problem is in comparing with Bandung. On the economic side, Global South largely came as an economic argument, the G77, third world, need for reforming the global economic order. But then China is the second largest economy. Is anyone saying that the Chinese capital is sweeter in its smell and taste than the Western capital? So this notion you're fighting against an enemy, while the number two economy, which is the biggest trade partner for the US, and an experience that our own neighborhood in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, our own trade deficits with China, this notion somehow Chinese economy and Chinese currency will be good for the world is an illusion that Chinese, I can understand why Chinese want to propagate it. But I think the other innocents around the world are simply swallowing this. But I don't think even India, they might not say this, Indian government might not say this, but would you want to jump from the dollar frying pan into the yuan fire? Is India desperate to replace dollar with yuan? Because after all, to talk about a de-dollarization, you're talking about yuan is the second most powerful economy. So I think this needless illusions are being created that this is some kind of a radical movement in the world order, that these countries are coming. Look, Europe is struggling with this currency. That Europe, at least they don't have a single sovereign political authority, but they put in a monetary authority, the European Bank. You think Russia, India, China will agree to a common bank, a reserve bank that will guide their currencies? Each of them so conscious of their sovereignty. So I think these people are talking, there's so much of hot air in relation to BRICS that a lot of it is just, I think, you can safely ignore it. But then illusions, it's a comfort to have illusions. So you can't take them easily. But the fact is, neither Bandung nor Global South have anything to do with what BRICS is. Chinese and Russians are trying to do with BRICS. And I think we'll come to the problems that China and Russia have themselves today. We can come to that later.
Yeah. The other thing you point out in the piece, which is very interesting, is that, and it's been now the conversation for some months, there's expansion of membership that China has been pushing, at least to some extent. We see it as benefiting. But does that really, as an interesting point you make, I mean, we can look at SAARC. I mean, you can add 20 more members to SAARC today, and because of India, Pakistan, it will not broadly, BIMSTEC and other forums and bilateral ties are much more likely to yield fruit. Similarly, with BRICS, does it, or even with NAM, at one point, allied countries, it was a good thing to be a member of and, make the right noises perhaps, but it became toothless. Precisely, we say a Pakistan, which was in an alliance, a military alliance with the US, was a part of NAM. There are many, many other examples. Do you think BRICS could just end up going that way with this expansion of membership?
My reading, the Chinese don't much care for the efficiency of the organization. They need a platform. For them, they're not looking at BRICS as a coherent solidarity organization. They see this as a vehicle to promote their concepts, Belt and Road Initiative, Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, how the Western order is bad and they're going to be the great saviors of the world. So they're looking at a platform. And I think this is where I think our friends in South Africa surprisingly have given them a platform. They're going to co-chair a dialogue for Africa. South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, and Xi Jinping. So that's what they want. I mean, they want a large number of countries sitting and listening to the great helmsman, Chairman Xi, hold forth on the world order. In any case, on BRI, on Global Security Initiative, they've not done any negotiations in BRICS. It is a unilateral policies. I think the Chinese are under the illusion that they have the power today to force a global agenda. And the BRICS is a useful platform. But my sense is neither India nor Brazil or others are simply going to roll over and say, please, Lord, come and run this show for us.
Then finally, what you said, going to Africa perhaps. So there's China and Russia, what it was, say, even 5 years ago, 4 years ago, before the Ukraine war and COVID, the two main disruptions in the global economy. At the same time, as you point out, it's not that they haven't made advances, maybe wrong, they have sunk their teeth into areas in Africa, in large parts of Africa, perhaps even West Asia to an extent that one hadn't seen China before. So how do you place, BRICS as the peg, as we say, in the newsroom, the context of Russia, China now, and the Great Power Rivalry?
Look, I think the Chinese have made advances on their own. I mean, there's no doubt. 30 years of economic growth has given them enormous opportunities. The Belt and Road Initiative was part of it. Export of Chinese capital, Chinese technology, Chinese telecom to Africa. They've really done a remarkable job in raising their economic profile. And the Russians have done the military bit, sending in the mercenary forces, the Wagner Group, to play, geopolitical games, pushing the French out of Western Africa, playing against the Americans. So they've also made gains. But that is not BRICS's gains. Those are Chinese and Russian gains. I don't think India would do the kind of things Russia is doing, sending mercenary troops to do all kinds of things. That's not what we do. We've done international peacekeeping. Nor our model of economic cooperation is also very different from the model the Chinese have. After all, what have we debated in South Asia for the last few years? That look, why is Sri Lanka in a position where it is? Why is Pakistan in a position where it is? So that debate has also started in Africa. It's not as if everything is hunky-dory, but I think we'll see what happens in the meeting with the Africans that South Africa has created this platform. But I think they are going to have problems, and that leads me to the fact China itself is having problems.
Yeah,
that it is also going to limit what they can do. But the fact is, they've made gains, and I think we have to acknowledge that the fact is that they've gained. That doesn't mean these things are not going to be. Others are not going to push back, or that these gains are permanent.
So, but do you see? Well, finally, it's also now that the West is no longer the West either of the Cold War, perhaps even 10 years ago. It's something you argued before as well. So, do you think the kind of we've seen it in the Indo-Pacific? There's been a lot of proactive, the US sort of taking on board more and more partners, mini groupings. Quad is one of them. AUKUS is another. There's one with, I think, Korea, and the Philippines is getting involved again. Do you see that kind of cooperation, and with India being a part of it in Africa, as we've had you and other writers argue before that the Abraham Accords were India had some place in that kind of scheme of things because of its close ties to both Israel and the UAE. Do you see the similar thing happening in Africa?
No, I think, in fact, Africa has emerged as a major priority for Indian diplomacy. We've increased the number of missions there. Trade is growing. India's economic assistance is growing. So there's no question that Africa is the future. I think anyone looking at long-term international look, the continent has enormous resources, enormous possibilities for growth, and much of the world is going to compete in Africa. So my sense is India will be engaged, and partly in competition with the Chinese and the others as well. But on the larger question, what is important, I think, as we point out in the article, what China has gained in Africa, it has lost in Asia. Look at China's neighbors. I mean, Japan, which is a passive, peaceful country, because of Chinese pressure, they're going to rearm themselves, doubling their defense expenditure. South Korea, which was very close to China in the last few years, has moved closer to the United States. They've overcome their nationalist inhibitions against Japan to form a trilateral coalition with the US and Japan. Look at Philippines, which was really being pushed around by the Chinese in the South China Sea. They're standing up. India, which was historically non-aligned, very friendly to China, thanks to Xi Jinping's genius. I mean, today India has gotten closer to the US. And Australia, which was a major trading partner for China, has created AUKUS, is building nuclear submarines. So I think Xi Jinping's policies have produced a backlash within Asia on the periphery. And I think that's a new feature. And what it tells us is that this whole, empty talk about American decline. America is finished. I can tell you in my college days, I mean, we were in JNU 1975 when Vietnam War came to a close. Americans ran out of Vietnam. We all thought the world imperialism has come to an end. We had a big demonstration coming from JNU all the way into the city. But then in 5 years later, the US bounced back under Reagan. So I think this notion that America is finished, the West is divided, I think partly Xi Jinping and Putin have bought into their own propaganda and today are facing the consequences, whether it's in Ukraine, Russia in Ukraine, or China in Asia, that the US has found ways to expand its coalitions and to push back. And I think the advantage, for countries of Asia is that unlike in the past, the US is offering to help these countries defend their sovereignty. So I think this is a different kind of United States strategy, which is not trying to control everything, but develop partnerships, which suits Asian countries, because in the end, Asians are going to stand up against China because their national interests are at stake. China is not the only nationalist in Asia. Indians are nationalists. So are the Koreans. So I think for them, if their sovereignty is threatened by China, they're going to stand up. And I think America is smartly supporting Asian nationalism in opposition to China. And I think that's beginning to pay dividends for them. So my sense is Russia and China have overreached. And the notion that they can simply tie a rope around BRICS and even a larger BRICS and make it into an anti-Western platform is a grand illusion.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. Read the piece. It's on the IndianExpress.com. So we'll see you next week.